Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I, Kritika, on behalf of Red Lantern Analytica, heartily welcome you all to the day one of the inaugural session of the Siang Dialogue 1.0. It is a 3-day virtual conference to have in-depth discussion about the Northeast region of India and the strategic scenarios at play. Our dialogue is named after the Siang River. Siang is the most important river in Arunachal Pradesh, which forms the main tributary of the Brahmaputra river system. Siang River has been the source of folk tales, folk songs, and folklores of the people living along the Siang Valley since time immemorial. It holds great ecological, cultural, and economic significance for the eastern Himalayan region. It is also associated with the Tibetan Buddhism and is considered sacred by many. Siang is a symbol of the Arunachal Pradesh and northeast of India. To throw more light on its strategic significance, today we have a distinguished panel of experts with us. The session 1 is called the Namsai Note, which Khampti means water and sand. It is a town situated near the Nao-Dihing River on the Assam-Arunachal Pradesh border and is best known for the Golden Pagoda or Kongmu Kham in the Tai-Khamti language as the one of the largest Buddhist monasteries in the northeast India. Also, the 6th Dalai Lama was born not very far from here in Tawang in 17th century. This rich and diverse backdrop makes Arunachal Pradesh one of the significant parts of India's unique history. Now, to begin the discussion, I would like to call upon Ms. Namrata Hasija, our subject expert and moderator for today's session, the Namsai Note. Ms. Hasija is a research fellow at the Center for China Analysis and Strategy. She was also a research fellow of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Taiwan and a former president of the Taiwan Alumni Association in India. She actively works on India-Taiwan relations and the Chinese foreign policy. With this brief introduction, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Kritika. Thank you for the introduction. And let me first congratulate the whole team for getting this, seminar, webinar together. And I think it's a very important subject. And so let me first begin by welcoming Mr. Nao-Dihing sir. I think, we are very lucky to have him, someone who's actually conceptualized the whole dialogue and someone who was, the driving force for the Red Lantern and Analytica team to actually have this Siang dialogue. So welcome, sir. Mr. Erin is the chief patron, of course, of the session today. He's currently a member of the Legislative Assembly of Arunachal Pradesh and a former Union Minister of State. He also represents as a co-chair at the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. He's also a mentor, of course, to the whole team of the Red Lantern Analytica and belongs to the Pasighat area of Arunachal, from where, of course, the mighty Siang River flows. And that is why, of course, the whole dialogue is called the Siang Dialogue. I welcome you, sir, and over to you to give your expert comments. Thank you, sir.
Please unmute yourself, sir. Ninam sir, if you can unmute yourself, please. Ninam sir, if you can unmute yourself, please. You are muted right now. Yeah.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, we have some network issues here in Arunachal Pradesh because we are very much close to China. Anyway, namaskar and good evening, all my very dear friends. I'm sorry, I was very busy in my schedules because this is an election year. But I'm really, kudos to the Red Lantern and Alka team who have, taken up this dialogue on the River Siang. Siang River is always in my, on my discussions, let it be in the parliament, let it be in the assembly, or let it be just in the medias or in the WhatsApp groups, or even in the Facebook and all. So let me be very frank. What you all are doing is a very big challenge because we already have an issue of the big dams that are coming up in the Siang River, and which the local people object to it. Since the last dams we had some dams here in Uttarakhand and all, even in Sikkim. So due to that, people have that fear psychosis. But still, because you are taking up this dialogue, I wish you all the best. I know I should have stayed the whole session with you, but what the Red Lantern Analytica is doing, I must, especially Ritika, I think you are and Namrata are doing a good job. Please take this up with all our colleagues who are joining us and will be joining us. And of course, because it is something like a technical discussion, and I'm a layman and just an ordinary politician, so it is tough to understand all of you. But I wish you all the best, and I hope this dialogue comes out very fruitful. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your words. Let me now Shripanna Pathak. Dr. Shripanna Pathak is an associate professor of China Studies at the O.P. Jindal Global University, Haryana. She is also a director for the Center for Northeast Asian Studies. She was a consultant at the Policy Planning and Research Division at the Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi. She has also received a joint fellowship awarded by the Ministry of Human Resource Development, India, and the China Scholarship Council, Government of the People's Republic of China. Also a great friend of mine and a great China scholar. Welcome, Dr. Pathak. Over to you.
Thank you, Miss Hasija. It's always wonderful to speak to Miss Hasija because she's so full of knowledge and wisdom. Thank you, Red Lantern Analytica, and as Ninong Ering sir already said, you all are doing great work. So thank you for hosting this. Without taking too much of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the strategic relevance of India's northeastern region. But before I come into the northeastern region and how it is of strategic significance, it becomes important to understand the geographic location, which makes it of extreme strategic value and also makes it easy for external actors to act in certain ways, which increases the problem for India. Now, the region comprises of Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram, Tripura, and Meghalaya. These all encompass the territory east of the Siliguri corridor, or what is also known as the Chicken's Neck. It's just a 22-kilometer wide railroad linked between Tibet in the north and Bangladesh in the south. The fact that the states like Arunachal Pradesh border with Tibet, Myanmar, and Bhutan brings out how sensitive some of these states are. Now, Northeast India is the gateway to Southeast Asia and beyond. It's India's land bridge to Myanmar. Its proximity to international markets, to both southwestern China and to Southeast Asia, make this region a potentially important base for foreign and domestic investors. The area is also extremely rich in natural resources like tea, oil, and timber, just to name a few. It also has a potential to generate 50,000 megawatts of hydroelectric power. It has an abundance of fossil fuels, and so on. So ecologically, Northeast India is also part of the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. It represents one of the highest avian and plant biodiversity in the Indian subcontinent. So from all these angles, it's easy to understand of what value this region in India is. Now, the issue is the region has seen some major unrest, especially in Nagaland and Manipur for the past few years now. The Naga insurgency has, because of this, been called the mother of all insurgency. It's been festering since India's independence. Now, it's also given impetus to a lot of other insurgent movements. What happens as a result of domestic crisis within India is that India's hostile neighbors take advantage of misgivings which are there domestically in these states. China and erstwhile East Pakistan actively have supported various insurgent groups. Post-1971, this support has reduced, it has dried up. The main supply route of arms now for insurgent groups in Northeast India is actually from Southeast Asia through Myanmar. Unchecked border movement facilities along the border with Myanmar also hampers the control over the free transit of arms. Now, in the beginning, I talked about all the potentials and all the resources which Northeast India has. And then there is this problem as well. So in the 21st century, there's been recognition amongst policymakers and economists that the main stumbling block for development in the northeastern region is the disadvantageous geographical location. It could have been a very advantageous geographical location had it not been for the presence of certain powerful strategic actors. Globalization propagates deterritorialization and a borderless world, which is associated with economic integration. With 98% of its borders with China, Myanmar, and Bhutan, and Bangladesh and Nepal, Northeast India definitely has a better scope of development in this area of globalization, as theory would suggest. Yet, there are certain things which theory does not really tell us. The fact that these can also be used for strategic purposes is something that is often missed out and is something which has led to a conundrum of festering issues. Now, it is often argued that Northeast India must look to a new way of development, which lies with political integration with the rest of India. And even the government of India has tried this, and the Look East policy then became Act East policy, giving a major boost to several host of developmental indices in Northeast India. Now, the question here is, what are some of the major concerns in Northeastern India, particularly from the lenses of international relations, which lead to strategic problems, which also lead to strategic advantages which India can have? I'll just briefly talk about 3 such points. There are a host, but I don't want to keep you away from the brilliant lineup of speakers that we have. The first issue is isolation from the rest of India. The region's accessibility has always remained weak due to geographical reasons, underdeveloped transport links with the rest of India. So the physical location of northeastern states makes it imperative that they develop in consonance with their neighbors. The region witnesses floods and landslides in the Brahmaputra and in the Barak valleys of Assam. So a considerable amount of strain is exerted on the economy of not just Assam, but also other northeastern states. Now, since I mentioned floods here, it is pertinent to mention how weaponization of water from an upper riparian state, Tibet-controlled China, leads to devastation in lower riparian states like India. So China has this habit of using ecological features like rivers as a political tool to dictate terms to its neighbors. One example of this is from 2017, during the Doklam crisis, when China refused to share hydrological data with India during the standoff. There is an agreement between India, China, and Bangladesh, because this river called Yarlung Tsangpo, which comes into India and is popularly known as Brahmaputra in Assam, there is an agreement on this between India, China, and Bangladesh, which basically is about information sharing regarding the amount or the volume of water flowing in the upper reaches of the Yarlung Tsangpo or the Brahmaputra. In 2017, China stated that its weather monitoring systems in Tibet have failed, which is why it did not share the data with India. As a result, there were terrible floods in Assam in 2017 because the lower riparian state India just did not know what was the volume of water which was coming down to India. Now, the sad bit is that Bangladesh got the data. And of course, it came to light much later on that Bangladesh received the data. Bangladesh was aware, therefore, of the volume of water that would be coming in, which is why it didn't suffer a devastating flood like Assam did. So clearly, water as an issue was being weaponized just because India and China were locked in a conflict. This weaponization of water happened. Now, this is not the only instance. China is also constructing this massive dam on the Mambuja-Zambo River, just a few kilometers north of the India-Nepal border, in order to use it as a weapon of war, as reported by the Geneva Daily in February this year. The Chinese government plans to construct a super hydropower dam on the Yarlung Tsangpo, as it has stated in its 14th five-year plan, 2021 to 2025. The report has claimed that the hydropower dam would be, quote unquote, meaningful for the environment, national security, living standards, and international cooperation. In reality, though, the ongoing excessive construction in the Yarlung Sangpo is neither eco-friendly nor is it beneficial for the local community. It's part of a Chinese state-engineered long-term preparation for the massive influx of Chinese migrants into the Kongpo region for permanent settlement. So this eventuality would cause irreversible damage to the local ecology, diminish local Tibetan identity, and greatly destabilize the hydrological balance across northeastern India. If we go back a bit, on March 1st, 2012, the Siang River went dry at Pasighat, the headquarters of Arunachal Pradesh's East Siang district, from where, Ninong Ering sir also briefly mentioned this and he spoke about this. 3 years earlier, if we go back beyond 2012, 3 years earlier, on June 9th, 2009, the same town of Pasighat saw floods like never before. The Siang was in a spit and the flood waters rose up to 30 meters, submerging almost the entire town. Cut forward to 2017, the same Siang River was full of slag, making its water so turbid that the authorities in Arunachal Pradesh declared it unfit for human consumption after tests in laboratories. The impact was also felt on aquatic life, with fishes dying or disappearing, perhaps into clearer waters somewhere. So, and it was, of course, coming in from the upper riparian state. So this is clearly a problem. The second issue which causes these strategic problems are territorial conflicts. Now, there are existing interstate and international territorial conflicts within Northeast India, which are often based on historical border disputes or differing ethnic, tribal, or cultural affinities. Examples include the Assam-Mizoram border dispute and so on. Now, China plays on the divides and further adds fuel to the fire. A case in point from this year's terrible crisis in Manipur is the fact that large cache of weapons was procured by active insurgent groups from Manipur in 3 vehicles, and it's been widely reported in open source resources. These weapons were reportedly brought from the black market situated near the Myanmar-China border before they were transported to Manipur. Talking about Manipur, if you look at the newer tools of warfare which China employs, which includes cognitive warfare, which is based on disinformation. There's been a lot of disinformation on Manipur, with statements like the Indian army is making concentration camps in Manipur and so on. Something which China is famous for, but yet it slapped it on India. While that disinformation is also fine, it might just be a few disgruntled people. It does not really make a big difference. The intent needs to be studied. Now, if you study Chinese social media, you will see that Manipur is referred to as Xiaochungwo or Little China, clearly showing the intent that they have. If you go back to 2015, the then Chinese ambassador to India, Le Yuchang, he had written an article in 2015 in Chinese. He had visited Manipur, and then he begins this article by talking about how beautiful Manipur is and what Manipur means, with playing on the word money. And then somewhere in the middle of the article, he talks about how it is connected to the rest of India via the chicken's neck, which can be snapped very easily. So clearly there is an intention for something larger. China does not lay claim officially to Manipur, but clearly these narratives definitely mean something. So China has proactive plans to increase its influence in the region. China remains a major source of concern. And this vulnerability of the Siliguri corridor is a major case in point. The third issue, which causes more strategic concerns and shows how important the northeastern region of India is the presence or the existence of insurgency and political issues. Insurgency or terrorism is a political weapon, and it leads to a lot of casualties, a lot of devastation, etc. Now, there's a lot of support from for insurgent groups from China. Paresh Barua is a case in point. He lives in Yunnan in China. Whenever the Indian government, one of the few times whenever the Indian government has raised it, either there is no answer or it is just brushed aside. Paresh Barua is not the only insurgent or terrorist who has sought refuge in China. In 2020, the National Investigation Agency of New Delhi filed a charge sheet against NSC and IM leader Alamla Jameer in a terror funding case. Jameer's case has a China link. Jamir is a so-called cabinet minister in the National Social Council of Nagaland, Isaac Muiwa, NSC and IM, and is the spouse of former Naga Army Chief Funting Shimrang, who crossed over to Yunnan in China in 2019 with two other associates. He's wanted by the National Investigation Agency in another case of crime. Jamir was arrested with articles that were there to fuel insurgency in the region and had Chinese footprints all over the articles. Another example is from 2011 when Wang Qing, a Chinese spy who disguised herself as a TV reporter, was arrested and deported after she visited the NSC and IM headquarters in Nagaland. Qing was a spy for the People's Security Bureau, which is China's intelligence agency. She back then had a 4-hour long closed-door meeting with the leader supreme of the NSC and IM. She entered Dimapur without the mandatory restricted area permit. And if you go further back to 2010, Anthony Shimre, the commander-in-chief of the NSC and IM, was arrested for gun running. He had connections with Chinese agencies. He himself confessed that Muiwa had written a letter to senior Chinese intelligence officers to appoint a certain person as the permanent representative of NSC and IM in China. And there are a lot of these instances from if you go further back beyond 2010 as well. So China's proxy wars in Northeast India range from support to abetment of terrorists to money laundering to arms supplies and so on. In 2014, there was an article published by China's Xinhua agency which stated that years of neglect has fueled unrest in Northeast India. The timing of this article was very interesting because Assam and Tripura went to the polls. And just around the polls, China's state-run agency said in the commentary, India's northeastern states were the country's most neglected region. The timing is very interesting and important because it was clearly an attempt to influence certain electoral choices. Right now, Manipur is boiling again. So trouble returns to India's remote northeast. There are fears that Myanmar could offer a safe haven for insurgents to regroup. It also harbors suspicions that rival China could be backing separatist groups. Beyond traditional and non-traditional forms of conflict, there's also a very vexed question around the influx of refugees coming in from Myanmar. The Global Times, the state-backed Chinese tabloid, has in the past carried out articles by so-called Chinese academics who have suggested that Beijing should consider backing separatist forces in India's northeast if New Delhi bolsters its diplomatic ties with Taiwan. So the tabloid has also told that China should stop recognizing the border state of Sikkim as a part of India. Already China considers the Indian-administered or India's Arunachal Pradesh as being China's and often gives out these articles, so-called academic articles, that it is illegally occupied by India. It did it all over again when India was holding the presidency of the G20 summit. So India and China have been in conflict for decades, but beyond the direct military conflict, there are also other realms, other forms of non-traditional security, which China is using, which are of severe strategic consequences. The northeastern region is eyed by China. It continues exploiting fissures amongst the local people and all other types of weaknesses prevalent in the region. The region definitely is also resource rich, which would help an energy-hungry China to further fuel its economic rise, especially now that the economy is on the boil and thanks to Xi Jinping's autocratic, very, very dictatorial policies is on a downward spiral. So it would definitely want more minerals, and the northeastern region of India fits the bill for China's concern. So Northeast India is definitely of huge strategic importance and of huge strategic concern. So with this, I'll just end my brief talk, because I know that there are wonderful panelists waiting, and thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Pathak. Indeed, I think you've covered the relevance of Northeast and how especially what China is doing when it comes to the Northeast region and how they're eyeing the Northeast, as you correctly mentioned. Let me now welcome Dr. Rajiv Nain, who's the guest of honor today. He's a senior research associate at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. He has published a book on global strategic trade management in 2019. He was also a visiting Fulbright scholar at the Center on International Cooperation, New York University. He is a member of the Governing Council of the International Export Controls Association, hosted by University of Georgia in Washington, D.C., and a member of the Export Controls Expert Group and Multilateral Security Governance in Northeast Asia, North Pacific, of the Council for Security Cooperation in Asia Pacific. His area of interest lie in international relations, security issues, especially the politics of nuclear disarmament, export control, non-proliferation, and arms control. Welcome. Over to you, sir. I welcome you to the conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Hashija. And I would also like to thank my friends Sonit Nayan and Mr. Siddharth Ghosh and the entire Red Lantern Analytica team. So thank you very much for inviting me, and although giving me a very short notice to speak, but it's challenging to speak on this topic. But I'm really glad. I had to rush. Of course, I had a meeting. So, but nice to see all young scholars and some very knowledgeable. I've been tasked to speak on geopolitics of Northeast and India as a strategy. And I completely agree with what Professor Sriparna Pathak spoke just now. I agree with her analysis, but I am growing old, so I will be slightly optimist, and I will be optimist and positive in my orientation. So when I speak, I'll talk about generally what India has been doing and whether India has been succeeding or not. So let me start first with the issue. The geopolitics. It is quite much abused or used term, whatever you call it, or overused term. So what happens? As Dr. Pathak pointed out, geography matters. And she talked about all the geographical signatures or geographical characteristics which make Northeast India very special. So the entire issue, the geopolitical issue, is based on some geographical determinism. What does it mean? But there are effects of geographical location and other geographical features on you can say foreign policy or international relations. Means one country's conduct or relationship with or approach to another country. It's generally its relations with other states. So then I will examine slightly whether we should fit in Northeast in this paradigm or in this framework or not. But I'll comment about it later. Geography is constant. You cannot change. Once you may remember, once Atal Bihari Vajpayee's statement, you can change history but not geography. So that is quite correct. But its impact can change. And many people will argue that technological and scientific advances have been altering or have altered or can alter the effects of distance, topography, and climate. And it is also concerned with the strategic value of geographical factors, resources, access to many other connectivity and other issues. But very interestingly, now we are talking about Northeast. So it is said that in the literature on geopolitics, you'll find that before Columbian epoch, geopolitics were generally regional. Generally, people did not think about something called global outlook. So, but afterwards, as I just mentioned, because of the changes in technologies, innovations, inventions, the world started shrinking. Geography as a factor in conducting relationship had to be reoriented and is still being reoriented. So as a discipline, when we are talking about, we generally refer to Zelen, who in 1899, he talked about many neologisms. And one of the neologisms was geopolitics. And what he talks about in it, he says that the location of a state in relation to other states is quite significant. And he also mentioned that the form of the territory of a state and its surface and physical characteristics, as just now Professor Pathak mentioned, are equally significant. And this idea was in fact taken over by the person who is generally considered synonymous with the term geopolitics or geopolitical studies, Haushofer or Friedrich Resel. This is a German geographer. Both were German geographers, and along with General Mahal, they projected a different kind of geopolitics, and which really made the very discipline quite untouchable after the end of the Cold War or after the end of the Second World War. So what did they perceive, or what did they conceive? They conceived a state or country, whatever you like to call it, a living organism. And they always considered borders are flexible. So the implication or consequences of it could be that, yes, border is flexible means you can have an expansionist plan, and all the wars which had taken place or which took place in the 20th century could be attributed to this kind of thinking. And that's why it was generally became a prohibited discipline. And many brilliant geographers, geopoliticians somehow could not get attention in higher discipline. So this is one very tragic part. Later on, when Kaplan wrote, and he has highlighted in his book that with the revenge of geography, many of the people who were not considered or were not taken into account in the discipline had to be taken into account, and their significance, their relevance, their contribution to the discipline is now being recognized. Still, the geopolitics is returning in international relations. So this is one. But what happens? The neoclassical geopoliticians in critical or school all distinguishes itself from classical geopolitics on many points. And one is, of course, the conception of state as an organism and border. Now they said borders are given. Don't think of expanding the border. And during the Cold War period, again, it was revisited, as I told you, after the end of the Second World War. Somehow the discipline did not grow, and political geography, those who have studied in JNU will recollect the department, the division. It was my division, my center, although I was in disarmament diplomacy. It was political geography in the same center, CPOD. And so you won't find the term geopolitics. You will find political geography, the division of political geography. Not very popular at that time. Now it is becoming very popular. So it is becoming popular. So this is how it is moving. So during the Cold War, still some people talked about nuclear geopolitics, and Jopo, George Baib, even Gray talked about the Colin Gray. I am from discipline nuclear. My center is nuclear. So that geographical factors are pervasive in world politics. So nuclear weapons or missiles or long-range delivery vehicles do not make geography so redundant or irrelevant. So even this person, who is considered to be very hawkish in his approach, also underlined the significance of geography. So geopolitics, Henry Kissinger, who recently passed away, he also popularized geopolitics. But overall, the discipline, the higher discipline, shunned geopolitics. So this is what has happened. Then we kept hearing the terms like geopolitics to geoeconomics, geostrategy, geoculture, so many things we have been hearing. So now I am coming to the point, internal geopolitics. I think many people are fascinated and are influenced by some of the writers who talked about political actors and internal diversity and conflict of interest inside the states. I think that led to many of the scholars in India to talk about geopolitics of Ladakh, geopolitics of Jammu and Kashmir, and many using many such phrases. Actually, Wanderdas der Wusten, he had talked about the democratic division and political division, democratic and non-democratic countries, weak state and the strong state, the countries which are just infested with civil war, poverty, anarchy. So all these, and Kolosov, Loglin, all this introduced the concept of pseudo-states and the emergence of subnational and supranational phenomena in geopolitics. But generally, predominantly, I would say that still it is avoided. And I also tend to avoid just segregating one section of the country for analyzing its strategic studies. So I have been speaking against it, and in fact, I gave a very bad mark to one person who had written a thesis, Geopolitics of Jammu and Kashmir. I think it is part of India, and it should be considered part of it. So any analysis should also consider part of India. So this is what we are saying. We still believe that the state is the principal geopolitical actor, and any improvement technological, yes, they have to be, all improvements are to be taken into account. So that doesn't mean that state is vanished, borders or boundaries have just disappeared from the scene. So that part is there. Now coming to Northeast India, I have to move fast. So again, as I told you, it's part of India and part of India's geopolitics. 8 states mentioned by Dr. Pathak, that's wonderful. So our Prime Minister has mentioned or referred to 8 foundation pillars for development of Northeast, that is grand strategy. And this approach is called Ashtalakshmi approach. So what are these Ashtalakshmi elements or components? First is peace, which Dr. Pathak, Professor Pathak talked about. Second is power. Third is tourism. Fourth is 5G connectivity. Fifth, culture. Sixth, natural farming. Seventh, sports. And its potential to grow. So these are Ashtalakshmis, what the Prime Minister talked about. So I'll just talk about some of these Ashtalakshmis to understand the strategic significance of Northeast India. So the first question which I'll raise is it part of India's regional geopolitics? Then I can answer, and my argument is yes, to an extent for the time being. And because we have got over 5,300 kilometers of international borders with several neighboring countries, definitely Northeast region has significant strategic value. The oft-quoted statement which Professor Pathak also said, that it is our gateway to Southeast Asia, and it can become a center for development of the entire region. It's not just Northeast region. When I talk about the entire Southeast and South Asia, both regions, it can become. And now we have got, because of this, the conversion of lookist or policy to actist to now we are also talking about just to implement it, the act fast for Northeast and act first for Northeast. So this is what in last 10 years Prime Minister Modi's government has tried to do. And Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh has stated when he was addressing to some of the armed forces plus northeastern people, that government accelerated development initiatives in Northeast have transformed lookist policy into actist policy, leading all-round developments in the Northeast region, enabling all the states to improve trade. I am just stopping here. Trade with Southeast Asian nations. And this is quite significant. And this is part of India's strategy, which I will just fast move. So what may happen? Again, I'm just seeing what wonders it can do. So now we all are hearing, but once you are talking about regional geopolitics, for the time being, I'm focusing on that. The free and open Indo-Pacific to counter a Chinese-centered order, Professor Pathak talked about a lot, and the cornerstone of America's Asian Alliance Network, the region's rising economic interdependence and its nascent multilateral institutions. I am using the term nascent because it is still struggling, and I have in some of my articles I have talked about there is no pan-Asian institutions to manage affairs. There is no pan-Asian regime also. So yes, it is being erected. So it is going on to create a new era of peace and prosperity. So we are looking for Asian multilateralism, and we have to, for that, we have to at least analyze, and if not counter, we can counter maritime Silk Road of the 21st century, which is supposed to pass through the South China Sea, Indian Ocean, down to South Pacific, and now Belt and Road Initiative. So this is basically strengthening or reorienting Han Dynasty's route, and this is how China wants to dominate this part of the world. So how we are going to do it? This is one question. So of course, as I told you, Ashtalakshmi will be there, but India is also going to use its cultural diversity, cultural heritage, and it is planning to move forward with that. So for that, Professor Pathak talked about peace. Now I have slightly a different take on that. If you read, I'll request all the people, all the scholars. I have limited time. I think I have 5 or 6. How many minutes, Professor Dr. Hasija? 5 minutes, I think.
Sir, if you could, wrap it up because it's you exceeded.
So what we have, I'll just move forward. If you just check the Ministry of Home Affairs website, Parliament's questions and answers, they provide rich data to you, and you will find that except Manipur is disturbed, it accounts to 50% of violence in the northeastern region. 2 states have not reported any single violence. That includes Sikkim, which was once doubted by others that whether it's part of India or not. But Assam, I can see Dr. Sarvana Barua on the screen. So now Assam is a different state, and I remember once I was there. Then at that time, Alpha, the crisis was there, so it was a different Assam. Now it is I was there again. It is a different Assam now. So things have improved, agreements have been signed, and peace talks are on. There are, of course, some border problems. So these border problems are getting solved. Manipur is becoming an exception, and I am hopeful that soon it will be solved too. So this is how we are moving forward on Northeast. So peace is required for development, and we are quite aware of it. There are many other plans also. I just move in 2 minutes. I have to finish. So then there are areas like connectivity. Again, I will say I have got data. If you want to say that, I can give you data on all. I think, am I audible? I think it is. Hello.
Yes, sir, you're all audible.
Okay. So because I see that I am frozen. So you'll find that in all spheres, connectivity is moving quite fast. All of spheres, you will see that changes are taking place. And you'll find in roadways, first time even railways has reached in Northeast region, in waterways, of course it is seaways you can't find. So I think we are prepared to counter China's connectivity or BRI quite well. And again in power, all the villages have been electrified like other parts of India. So this is one great significant achievement we can just boast of. Similarly, if you read a space program, there is a special space program for Northeast India. So this is how the country is moving forward, and we are determined, and UNDP is there. There are so many meetings which were organized to bring investment in and to supply goods to Southeast Asian countries and to bring prosperity in the Northeast Indian region. And as I told in the very beginning, my argument was for the time being, temporarily, momentarily, we could be focusing on regional geopolitics, but soon it will not just be regional, but Northeast India will be playing a greater role, part of India's grand strategy. And now the way the countries are taking interest in G20, some countries took interest. Now we have got airports, and which are directly related to now, of course, with some of the Asian countries. There's a list. If you want to ask, I can provide you the list of the countries. And plus now Mexico to United States to Canada, many countries are interested here. And initially during G20, 5 countries showed their interest, but others are also going to show interest in the region very soon. And all of us are hopeful. And Northeast India has been vouched or been told that will be the engine of not only growth, but in fact our engine of grand strategy. And I just wish, thank you very much. If any question, I will answer that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your remarks. I'll next invite Dr. Shabana Barua, who's a research fellow at the Indian Council of World Affairs. She is also a doctoral candidate at the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Relations Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Her research interests lie in geopolitics of South and Southeast Asia, particularly China, India, and Myanmar. Over to you, Dr. Barua.
Thank you, Ms. Asija. Am I audible?
Yes,
Okay.
you're audible.
Okay. So I think I will not take more than 10 minutes. We will wait for the Q&A because that's when the real questions come and we can get to few specific issues. Congratulate firstly to Red Lantern Analytica. I think they have been doing an excellent job for quite some time now. And also to both the speakers, especially in terms of one giving a picture which a reality check for the Northeast, and the other talking more positively. I'll try to balance both coming from there, and so does Dr. Pathak. But today I would like to just call on, touch upon something that Mr. Rajiv Nayan has touched upon, that is connectivity, since my expertise lie there, but also talk about geostrategy and how that connectivity is improving the strategic aspects of the Northeast region today. Firstly, let me just at the outset say, just like the previous speaker said, that I would like to be positive. That is, we should not treat geostrategy or geopolitics of Kashmir or Northeast as separate. It's one same thing. So similarly, I think when we talk about mainstreaming things for Northeast, I think it's already mainstream. There is no mainstream and non-mainstream. It is very much a part of everything that, I mean, when we look at the country, we should, of course, objectively keep in mind that it is a border region for India's overall larger picture, but at the same time, it's very much today mainstream. It is very much a changed picture today for the Northeast, unlike it was in the 1980s and 1990s. So I would suggest that we avoid using that term mainstream. Similarly, you know, when we say it's a bridge to our east, a bridge always leads from point A to point B. We don't know what, so many directions that Northeast of India can take us, not just to Myanmar, but I think if we extend it to the ASEAN region, how diplomacy, how NER is playing a very big role in India's diplomacy towards our east, that is also very important. Now, coming to the China factor, I think that is always a big question that we have to address. And I think Dr. Pathak has already elaborated quite a bit. I would just point out one or two things in terms of the strategic aspect of it. Number one is that, and link it, of course, with the connectivity part of it, we have the aspect of, or the potential of, building roads that lead up all the way to China. In fact, one very big example is the Stillwell Road, which becomes the Burma Road and then goes on to China. It was a road that was built in the 1940s during the World War II, and then it is redundant now. But what is important is that China has rejuvenated the Burma Road, the part of that road that goes from Burma to China. So they have developed that aspect of that road, and in fact has also suggested that New Delhi develops its part of the road, which goes through Pasighat, basically Arunachal, and then it will link up through Myanmar all the way up to China. Now, within the Northeast, there have been people who are promoting that New Delhi should do it. Trade would increase, given that it's a different scenario. Connectivity is already doing so well in that part of the country. We should take that up. But geostrategically, how relevant or how doable that is obviously questionable. There is not only going to be, in my opinion, there is not only going to be an increased potential of, China sending the so-called proxy war agents to the region. There is going to be increase of, say, opium trade or any kind of illegal businesses that are going to come up, and that opens up a window for China to therefore get into the region and do as it wishes. And I mean, we know the story, how it could really go. So that is one example that I wanted to highlight in terms of connectivity, as well as the real things that could happen on the ground. The other thing, which is hopefully a more positive picture, is that when we talk about connectivity and we talk about geostrategy, we must remember that the Chinese had built up its connections with Myanmar. In terms of it, of course, they've had a great long history uh, between China and then Burma, but then they had started to build their connections all the way, or the connectivity links all the way up to the Indian Ocean back in the 1980s. It is at that time that the Chinese Vice Minister of Communication had then written an article in the Beijing Review that, you know, China must extend its connectivity to the Indian Ocean. It should make a strategy. And in the 1980s, that strategy was very much on paper, but eventually how it panned out, we all know today. China has a lot of, I mean, the main link that it has to Myanmar, I mean, to the Indian Ocean through Myanmar, is basically to the Chokpu port, which is which according to experts, or what we call the string of pearls theory that did come up in the early 2000s, Chokpu port was one of them, one of the pearls that could you know, encircle India in the geostrategic aspect of it. So we must keep in mind that China has had this strategy for quite some time, and today what India is doing is look at that not just in the geostrategic point of view, but of course bring a positive story into it and say that we are also doing it not just because China is building these ports and connectivity links, but also because India needs to do so in its own right, in its own need to reach out to the other Southeast Asian countries. And therefore we came up with our Kaladan multimodal transport transit project, for instance, which of course also has its own had its own limitations, if I can say so. But in 2023, only recently, few months ago, we finally managed to send you know, cement from the port of Kolkata to the Sitwe port that India is building, and the SEZ that India has planned as part of this Kaladan multimodal project. The point being that not just geostrategy, but we are also trying to link geoeconomics to it, that we may be able to eventually use these locations, these strategic locations for our economic needs, and how we can therefore make the best of the blue economy that's lying towards the eastern part of India, and then we can therefore reach to all the ASEAN states and so on and so forth. So I think these two aspects are very important. The China factor, of course, in terms of both its strategic things on the ground, and also the geoeconomic factor. The other part that I would like to highlight is the role of Northeast in India's diplomacy. Already touched upon the BBIN, for instance. To be remembered is the fact that when we talk about Act East policy, or Look East being converted to the Act East policy today, India's Act East policy doesn't act only from the Northeast. The Andamans, for instance, it lies very close to Indonesia's Tawang region. So we need to keep that aspect in mind. But nevertheless, because of the Act East policy, there has been a lot of bolstering of things in the Northeast region, especially in terms of connectivity, but also not just physical connectivity, cultural connectivity, and so on and so forth. Within that, if we highlight the BBIN case, the BBIN is something that has done reasonably better than I think the other forums that have been there. The BCIM is another one, for instance, which was initially in the 1990s, late 1990s. It was started off as the Kunming Initiative, which then converted into the BCIM, that is Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar. But that apart, the BBIN is doing much better today, in my opinion. And there is a lot of connectivity, but also potential for integration. Till we do not integrate this region better with our foreign neighbors, with our the rest of the country in terms of connectivity, and overcome the dangers of the so-called chicken neck that we spoke about, I think talking about connectivity doesn't fulfill all the aspects if we don't figure out how do we integrate this. So there are many examples, and since we do not have so much time, I would also leave all the data out at the moment. But for instance, we have the Akhura-Agartala rail network. I think that was already being spoken about, but also the inland water transport. Now, the potential of resources in Northeast region that Dr. Pathak also spoke about when she was introducing that region, I think everybody in the country and beyond knows, but also these same geographies were also once, and since I did touch upon geoeconomics as a little, these geographies were once also thriving because of the inland waters and so much of water issues that we have been talking about. And if India doesn't utilize these water resources, we are running short of our, we are not stretching out to our utmost potential. So the fact that the government of India has come up with reviving these inland water transport system, the National Waterway 16 and 2 particularly, the Brahmaputra and Barak, the kind of work that is going on in that aspect is also commendable. Once we are able to get to the level of making actually not just ferries, but any kind of, we utilize the potential to its best, I think the geoeconomics of it will also come out in a better way. The other thing that I would end with is the fact that the water disputes that both speakers did touch upon is unmissable. It's the fact that even in the Siang River, I think if we link the dispute as well as the connectivity aspect of it, we had in Brahmaputra, we have plans for 6 bridges in the Brahmaputra. In the Siang, the first bridge came up recently. So the fact that connectivity is what is being used, physical connectivity, to make a region which so far or has not been able to develop its full potential because of physical development. Now the government is trying to bridge that gap of providing bridges, providing networks, connecting people and connecting roads and railways and stuff. So because of that, we have also gained attention to building barrages, I think, in Siang, that China is coming up with their dams, but also we are taking certain kind of actions at our level so that the river doesn't really dry up. So these things are being discussed even at the, I think New Delhi is also taking these up, and not just being discussed at a regional Arunachal or a regional level in Northeast, but these proposals have come all the way up to New Delhi, and I think New Delhi is acting quite fast. The last thing that I would like to tell the audience today is the fact that, when we talk about geostrategy, politics, or even geoeconomics, all three have to be looked at in terms of a comprehensive picture. Here, the China factor obviously comes up more and more, but my point being that we have to balance, I think, both that China is not the only reason we are doing what we are doing in Northeast. We ourselves are capable and will have to do things irrespective of China. I have said this multiple times that we have Japan coming in such a big way in the Northeast today. Japan has the ODA loan, the ODA that has come in Northeast is exceptional from Japan. We have Singapore, in fact, last year that came in with 2 projects in Northeast. There are missions that have been being brought up by the government. So all I want to say is that Northeast, the picture has changed in Northeast, but we have to be objective in what the reality is. But at the same time, be positive in going about things. Unfortunately, a lot of times we are over enthusiastic about all these things. One big example is, it's a funny one, that there was a proposal, or at least an idea, that a 61 or 63-story building is going to come up in Guwahati. It's a twin tower and so and so. It's not possible. We have to remember the geography. We have to remember to what extent we can push the natural resources and the we must remember the tectonic plates in the region it doesn't allow us to do certain things, so we do have our limitations. I think I would stop here, and I would wish that there are questions that come so that we can interact better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baruha. I think point well taken that India, of course, is doing a lot, and we need to do a lot in Northeast, irrespective of China. But someone whose main focus has been, of course, what China is doing, and I think what Professor Pathak has also brought out, we of course cannot ignore China. Right, and it is something that we need to discuss. And I don't want to repeat what Professor Pathak has already spoken about, especially the threats that have been issued after 2017 by, that has been published not only in Global Times but across the Chinese media. And she's spoken at length, and in fact, you and Dr. Nayan has also spoken at length about the dams and all that are being built. So let me, in fact, take everyone to something that has been happening recently. In the sense, I'll flag 3-4 things that have happened recently, especially in the Tibet Autonomous Region, that India needs to take note of. When, of course, we're talking about Northeast. So when it comes to the Northeast, we need to take a few things in account, what the recent things that have happened. So let me begin by saying that China is, of course, positioning Tibet as a fulcrum of for its strategic policy in the sensitive Himalayan region, and thus directly and adversely impacting India. Now, why I say this, because especially the plans that started, they had a small conference in 2018 when they started, when they invited participants from different Himalayan countries. And they started talking about, how, of course, they can cooperate in many areas. But, over the years, they have developed a proper, forums, 2 forums that recently happened in Tibet. So now, let me just begin by saying that Beijing appears to have assessed that it has sufficiently, calmed the Tibet Autonomous Region. Now what they're doing is they're opening Tibet for a wider interaction with foreign countries. Now we see that, a lot of visitors, a lot of visits are happening, groups are coming to Tibet. Now 2 recent events in TAR and TAR party secretaries' trip to Nepal, Sri Lanka, Singapore, Thailand, and Maldives, earlier this month, I think that needs to be viewed in this background. Now, like I said, China appears to be preparing to enhance military, economic, diplomatic pressure on India in the Himalayan region along India's northern frontiers. Now, few military activities, especially in the Tibet Autonomous Region across the actual line of control, including across Arunachal Pradesh, has increased in recent months. I'll give you one example. One example is the PLA's 71st Group Army, though its operational jurisdiction covers the Jiangsu province region, revealed an addition to its military capability earlier this November and used a tactical ballistic missile during a live fire exercise in the Gobi Desert. Then there's another report disclosed that the presence of Red Arrow 12 missiles in the Xinjiang military area. Now, PLA Rocket Force and PLA Strategic Support Force units are also that are present in the PLA Western Theatre Command close to the LAC. And we have enough satellite images that China is also constructing a new underground military facility in Shannan in the TAR. So these are a few things. Like there are other things also, but I don't want to take a lot of time. I can maybe, if somebody has a question in the Q&R session, I can answer to that. Now, Also because to show that Ningxi, has an elevated importance for the Chinese President Xi Jinping, is that, of course, Ningxi, we all know, is just a bang opposite, it's Arunachal. He's visited it a total of 3 times. Once as China's president, of course, in July 2021, earlier in 2011, when he was the vice president, and once in 1998 as party secretary of Fujian. He's also traveled to Ningxi each time he has visited Tibet Autonomous Region after he's taken over. And the visits indicate his interest in, of course, Arunachal Pradesh, or what the Chinese now refer to as Southern Tibet. So we need to take everything into account. First is the military buildup that the Chinese are doing, these new units that have come up, and also President Xi Jinping's visit to Ningxi every time that he has visited TAR, whenever he has visited. Then the third is on October 4th and 5th this year, China convened its 3rd China-Tibet Rim of Himalayas International Cooperation Forum for International Cooperation in Ningxi, TAR. Now this, somehow I feel we've not discussed this in India. Like, I've not seen anyone, very few, maybe 1 or 2 people who have brought this up in discussions, but I feel it's important because though its theme is ecological civilization, environmental protection, but I think what we have to note is that 280 representatives from over 40 countries attended this. And international organizations attending this conference were Pakistan, of course, Pakistan's acting foreign minister was there, the interim foreign minister of Afghanistan was there, chairperson of the National Assembly of Nepal was there, secretary of the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources of Bhutan was also there, and the deputy prime minister of Mongolia and Sri Lanka's minister of sports and youth affairs was there. So while, of course, there were the other participants while many of the others have companies working on mining and other projects in Tibet, I think what India needs to take note of is the representatives from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, and Bhutan. To me, it feels that China wants to or intends to involve them in the policies, in its policies for the Himalayan region. Now, just a month later of this conference that I'm talking about, on November 4, 2023, there was another conference, which is 2023 Annual Conference on China-South Asia Society and the Intersection and Integration of Regional Country Studies and Frontier Studies Academic Seminar. Now, this was held in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet Autonomous Region. Now, this conference, the first meeting was held in 2018, again in the Tibet Autonomous Region. Now, it's become an annual conference where they are calling people from the Himalayan, all the Himalayan countries. And then the 5th thing that happened is right after this conference, you see that the TAR party secretary, Wang Chunzang, he visited Nepal, he went to Sri Lanka, he went to Singapore, he went to Thailand, and he also went to Maldives. To me, as a China watcher, unusual for China's provincial party secretaries to the TAR party secretary was accompanied by a cultural troupe with stage performances in Sri Lanka and Singapore. And during his, of course, 5-day stay in Nepal, he met everyone right from the president to the interior minister as well. Now, then invitation to Bhutan, to me, I think would be an intention to entice Bhutan into, having this positive progress that they're having on the China-Bhutan boundary talks. And on the sidelines of the 3rd China-Tibet Rim of the Himalayas International Cooperation Forum for International Cooperation, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi meets the Afghanistan Acting Foreign Minister. And of course, discussing the opening of the strategic corridor to enhance trade ties between Beijing and Kabul. I think these developments, let me just end by saying that these developments indicate that Beijing is intent on setting up a grouping of Himalayan states and drawing them into its economic, diplomatic, and if possible, cultural, religious sphere, and at the same time confront India. The construction of roads will facilitate Chinese exports, of course, and people to these corridors, offer them alternate routes, and gradually overwhelm their economies. Though, of course, I'm not saying this is going to happen, it's happening tomorrow, because these things have happened. It will take years to take shape. But China has started focusing on growing its economic, political, and military influence in these countries, and we cannot deny that. And the last thing is, we cannot deny it. We also have to understand that the recent presence of the Deputy Prime Minister of Mongolia, that China will make efforts to ensure that it's, because we all have to understand that there's also a lot of debate. I see in very limited circles in India that China is really worried about, the succession, of course, of the 14th Dalai Lama. So all this and the Himalayan regions, because I think India kind of needs to take note of these things. I'm not saying that, we need to overthink it, but these are points that we need to think. The 5-6 points that I have said, the recent developments, I think India should take a note of, and that is where I'll end my remarks, and maybe answer more in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Good evening. So, being part of the moderation team, I would like to start with the question. I would like to ask the question. So, how can India strengthen its defense internally against the growing insurgent groups in the northeast when several countries are influencing these groups? That would be first.
Who you are asking to?
You can answer, sir. It can be for you.
Okay, so anyone? So I can also answer. No, we have adopted a very complex approach to deal with insurgency. In fact, insurgency is almost ending there. You will struggle to find, and you will find many agreements just to suspend violence. There is a very unique kind of approach the Indian government has taken. But they are saying, okay, you just don't permanently enter into the agreement to end violence, but at least suspend it and let us talk. So this is what we have been doing. This is one approach. Second is, we are talking, no doubt about that. We are talking to Nagas also. We are talking to everyone. We are trying to bring peace. Development is third approach which we are taking. Fourth, we are very sternly talking to those who were and who can sponsor the insurgent groups. Of course, China will never agree that it is giving any arms or ammunition. And I'm giving a very interesting story which was told to us by the former Home Secretary N.N. Vohra. And he told that once they had seized one consignment of arms, and they protested it through Ministry of External Affairs to the Chinese government. And there was a clear-cut Chinese mark on the weapon or the consignment which they had seized in Northeast India. Thereafter, what happened? That mark vanished, but arms continued to flow in. So this is how Chinese do. They just refine the network. So that is a challenge that we are undertaking. Plus, in confidence. Sorry, our electricity has gone. So confidence among northeastern people that you have to come in the front, and only you can do or you can handle the situation. And that, very interestingly, there are some exceptions that confidence is coming in, and we are finding that things are really changing a lot. Another issue which once we talk about, there are some areas, especially in Myanmar. People talked about Myanmar. We are talking to Myanmarese government also. And before launching our preemptive strike in Pakistan, we had rehearsed it in Myanmar. And
Kritika, I think we're not able to hear, so
No. So I'll ask the second question. Any of you can please answer
Can
that.
I just add one bit to what Mr. Rajiv Nayan already said? Just I'll do it very quickly, and I'll not take more than 1 minute. So as he was also saying that the approach is to stop violence. First, it is to stop violence. I think recently also people here might have read as to how there was this UNLF insurgent faction in Manipur, which has bid farewell to arms, and it has agreed to renounce violence and has agreed to join the mainstream, etc. There are the Naga peace accords, etc. Also, Alpha, which was a terrible threat to common people's peace and security, at least even in the 1990s or early 2000s, that is no longer the case, because now there is something called surrendered Alpha. So the approach is to first create these conditions so that these outfits do not receive popular support, they give up arms. While that is the case, what a lot of these outfits are also doing is that they continue recruitment using the cyberspace. Now, India is thinking of a national security strategy in which it is talking about cyber warfare, and it's talking about indigenous technologies. What India could do is possibly look in how this facet of non-traditional security unfolds in Northeast India and have something specific for it also. The other thing which India needs to definitely do is that use the 1267 Committee of the United Nations. India often takes, Pakistani-based terrorists to the 1267 Committee, which of course is blocked by China, and then other democratic nations come in together, and that's how India is able to list them. Funting Shimrang or Paresh Barwa, they are in China. So this needs to be raised at the United Nations also, instead of just focusing on Pakistan-based terrorists. I think Dr. Shrabana Barua has extensively spoken about the connectivity projects. These can also bring in a lot of development. But what needs to be done is that it needs to be ensured that these do not get derailed. With regards to Myanmar, again, India's approach has been very different. When the military junta took over a few years ago, the other members of the Quad, except India and Japan, were taking a very different sort of approach. They were talking about economic sanctions and targeting the junta and so on. But India and Japan decided that it's better to create local capacity, create development indices, etc., so that the people themselves develop first, and then this sort of a support for rebel outfits, for secessionist outfits can get over. So India also contributed to the creation of a parliament and so on. Japan did the same. So the approach is different. These sorts of approaches take a little bit time. It's easier to go militaristic and completely wipe out the problem, but the problem is going to come back in a few years. So hopefully these sorts of approaches continue, along with using some of our friendly neighbors with similar values for development. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, ma'am. Hello, everyone. This is Shalini. I would like to announce to the participants that the chat box is open if anyone has any questions. And personally, Shriparna ma'am, I have one question from you. Continuing on the Myanmar issue, what role do you see China playing out in the coming times, with respect to the war, and where the junta it's appearing to be worn out against the rebels, and the rebels group, it also consists of the Chin people, who are the ethnic Chinese people. So what's your take on that? Ma'am, if you could just unmute yourself, you're muted.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Online is always a problem. China's role in Myanmar, Myanmar's internal conflicts, obviously has deep implications, because even if there was this study which was I think done back in 2018 or 2019 by the United States Institute for Peace. And they also said that China's involvement in Myanmar's internal conflicts, in Rakhine State, in Kachin State, in Shan states, has a lot of implications. Myanmar, since gaining its independence from the British colonial rule, It has faced a lot of ethnic division and conflict. A lot of their political movements, their armed wings have sought political, economic, and cultural and social rights. China, of course, supports these fissures or these factions with arms supply or refuge for a lot of people who might have committed acts of serious violence. So in northern Myanmar, near the Chinese border, there's fighting, between the Tatmadaw and ethnic armed groups. It has increased despite its efforts to advance a comprehensive peace process. Now, the question is that, China seems so interested in conflicts which are taking in West Asia, that whole peace deal which it did last year, or it making statements on the current Israel-Hamas conflict and so on. One thing about China is that it will pick up roles to negotiate peace in those arenas in which it can showcase itself as a winner. The Myanmar conflict, A, it's too messy. B, China has had a historical role in arms supply and giving a lot of refuge. C, it is not that important. How many countries or institutions in the world right now are talking about Myanmar? It is in deep crisis. It is crisis for India because any instability in the region means refugee influx, means arms supplies, more arms supplies into Northeast India and so on. But how many countries in the world right now are talking about Myanmar? Yeah, it's been on the boil for quite a few years, but does that mean one stops talking about it? So from China's lenses, it is not that important. It will not show itself as the leading player or as the hero or the savior. So which is why it's kept it on the back burner. But that doesn't mean arms supply has stopped. So China definitely has economic interest or political influence in the country. But for its own concerns, for its own national interests, it's sought to just leave it there. Also possibly because this might be a very big conjecture, but it stirs unrest in India's borders. That works well for China. So I think I've spoken too much. So I'll just stop here and then maybe the others can also answer.
I would just like to quickly bring out one point here. Sorry, but I have to leave after this if I'm allowed to. I think in China's case, the things that have already been spoken about, that there is already a lot of arms and ammunitions that have been brought in the 1990s, 92, 93, two bridges that were built in the border between China and Myanmar. They eventually got termed locally as gun bridges because all that came in was guns at that point of time. And today, and even earlier, in fact, the Upper Burma area is something that the Chinese had a great control over and continues to have control over many of these ethnic arms organizations. But if we talk of the immediate scenario, we have been getting news about how the junta is coming under pressure from a lot of groups. But there are also articles that are saying that it is not China that we outsiders usually tend to point fingers at, that China has been cautious in how much of involvement it has given and supported in the recent times. So in my opinion, there has been a slight change in Chinese attitude also towards Myanmar. Their main idea is that they have to, or the so-called geostrategic, the geostrategic objective of China currently, rather than getting into their local domestic politics and then get things done, is to secure their lines of so-called communications or their projects in the country more than getting involved in the local politics, because that itself, Myanmar is creating the mess themselves also, to be remembered, is that fact. And as recently as within the last 1 month, we have been getting reports of how there have been not just killings on both sides, but also finally a potential pressure point on the junta to give up in certain areas. And to what extent China is playing a role in that is still being, at least for me, I'm still analyzing that. I won't comment on it openly. But the underlying point is that how China is looking at Myanmar earlier and how China is looking at Myanmar in the immediate context in the last 2 to 3 years has changed, in my opinion. And with this, I think I will have to leave. I'm really sorry, but it was great to have you. May I just take your leave, the organizers? If
Yes, ma'am.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you so much to both the speakers as well and Ms. Hasija. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. So we have two questions, three questions in the chat box. So firstly, Rajiv sir, if you're online, then it's on the security perspective. So Sapswa is asking how to defend the chicken's neck corridor from external and internal enemies.
Look, I will not use camera because I am facing some problems here. So I'm now using my handsets, my mobile. So please forgive me that. So I'll be speaking. So look, internally, yes, of course, we have to be careful. We have to be cautious and alert. Or about the external, who is posing the threat externally. So that is one big question mark, which we have to do our defense preparedness, and we are adopting the deterrence method. So means we are also mobilizing our troops whenever it is required. So we are doing quite well. So now, but the situation on the chicken neck has improved a lot. I will not say that is a very alarming situation. So, but yeah, internally we have to do things. What the things which are required to be done? Yeah, we have to strengthen our internal security mechanisms. And we have to involve people, the civil society, in the task. The moment we talk about internal security, we should not just rely only on law and order machinery when it comes to a broader security concept or a broader security phenomenon. So that part we have been in fact involving, and we are succeeding. This is one factor and one issue which is really rattling many of those who are using proxies, who are proxies and to destabilize India. Chicken neck, yes, this is an issue, and there at times they try to put pressure, but our armed forces are now uh, 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 quite on alert. And second, we have learned lessons, and our mountain warfare is quite improved, and we are ready to answer those who try to do any venture. We have got uh, airfield. We can launch our aircraft. Plus, we have got mountain divisions. We had planned to have 7 mountain divisions, and many of them have been already in place. But if required, we can do more. So, in fact, now people are getting training. So, I think this is not an issue. So, be assured, we will take care of internal or external enemy. So, we are now capable and we are quite confident. Earlier, we were not confident. So, now we are confident. Now, as Professor Pathak mentioned, whether it is Doklam or anywhere else, we are replying, and we will reply, continue to reply. And now we don't have time. Otherwise, I would have given you segment by segment analysis, whether it is Air Force, Navy, and I can suggest people do read Jim Holmes' book on the advantage India on Navy. The gentleman is from American National Defense University. He has compared and you can say he has analyzed. Even if China may appear outnumbering India by 1:4, yet what are strategic advantages for India? And beautiful work, and you must read. And he says that India will even win the naval war if it takes place. Air Force, we are not weak. Now we have got Rafale, and now we have got our own indigenous system. Plus we have got Russian system. Air Force, now we have got artillery forces. So in all realms, now we have got strategic weapons. I don't want to say because this is my area of research. So if there also we are not weak. So we are not weak. We are prepared. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, participants, due to the paucity of time, we cannot take further questions. So I would like to deliver a vote of thanks behalf of the Red Lantern Analytical team. So I would like to express gratitude to Sri Nenong Ring sir, Dr. Sriparna Pathak ma'am, Dr. Rajiv Nayan sir, Dr. Shabana Baru, and Ms. Namrata Hasija ma'am for their smooth execution of the dialogue and even insightful thoughts on the PRC and even the Siang dialogue. Last but not least, thanks to all the participants for their active participation in the session today. It was wonderful to have you all here. We look forward to seeing you all in our next session, that is Lohit Longitude, from 5 to 6:30 p.m. That is tomorrow. We will now bring the session to an end with the permission of the speakers.